I think that we are possibly the largest pastured pig operation in the U.S. right now. I'm not
You
certain
gotta be
on that. Yeah, we're sitting
on
about
the top.
250 sows right now. We're going for 400, so by middle of next year we should be at 400 sows. Farrowing really ought to be looked at as a separate enterprise from the market hog grow out. And in an operation like ours, the farrowing is probably close to twice the labor that the grow out is. In 1998, one huge processing plant goes down and there's no longer capacity to slaughter them all. So the hog market just immediately crashed. So Dad was on track to lose everything if he'd kept in that commodity business. We're processing probably 1,500 to 2,500 depending on exact year and where the sow herd sits. Wow. That'll of course go up pretty significantly once we get up to those 400 or so sows that we'd like to have. Getting to the point that we've got the genetics that we really want. Selected for the last probably 4 generations, with our main focus being on forage efficiency of the animals. So we're not to the point of having an entirely grass-fed pig by a long shot, but I really think that here in probably another 1 to 2 generations we'll have market hogs to the point that post consolidation into that market hog group, we'll probably put another month or 2 of feed into them and be able to pull the feed entirely.
We haven't even got started yet, but we had to sanitize our boots.
Yep.
Let's talk about that here in a second, but we definitely are just like walking around in solution because you don't know where I'm coming from.
Absolutely nothing fancy. The
right.
big guys of course all have crazy biosecurity measures.
I had to wash in and wash out when I worked at a pig farm,
yeah,
so I know all about that.
We're not that far, but there's of course PRRS, there's some of those different diseases that can be huge economic impacts, let alone the humane treatment of the animals in that regard, the sickness and the impacts that can have. So it's fairly minimal step that we do, just boot sanitation, but it's at least something to somewhat cover our bases.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're gonna step back out here. So we just washed our boots. You're Evan, and we are at Gunthorp Farm, which is kind of like Indiana's mainstay for pasture-raised pigs. Like you guys kind of set the precedent here in Indiana.
I'm not going to say it too publicly. I think that we are possibly the largest pastured pig operation in the U.S. right now. I'm not
you
certain
gotta be.
on that.
We just saw Jordan Green.
To farrowing, at least.
Yeah, we just saw Jordan Green. He's scaled back, so I think you got to be.
Yeah, we're sitting about 250 sows right now. We're going for 400, so by middle of next year we should be at 400 sows.
That's awesome. We're gonna go see him. Let's go check him out. Okay, so we made it out to one of the paddocks that you have. Walk us through what you actually have going on here. We talked about, you kind of started pasture pigs in Indiana. You got the largest pasture pig operation probably in the country. How did it get here? What happened? How did this begin?
Yeah, so farm history started way before me. I would be a 5th generation hog farmer, I believe 5th generation out on pasture. But Dad was raising pigs, I guess 1992 or so. Dad bought this property. As of 1994, my grandpa told Dad that it was time to get out of the hog business. Grandpa and Dad were farming together at that point. Dad didn't want to be the last Gunthorpe raising pigs, so Dad bought the sow herd from Grandpa and went out on his own. Started on this property in 1994, and of course, if you know anything about the hog market, 1998, the hog market crashed, and Dad was absolutely on track to lose the farm if he'd kept in the commodity business.
So how was he raising pigs then?
Still raising pigs out on pasture, still very similar practices to what we were doing now, but he was selling into the conventional markets, either loading them up, taking them to the buying station, or else, I think it was IBP at the time, would send a semi out and pick up from the farm. And there was still a viable market in doing that up until 1998. Of course, hog market was great in 1997. Tyson bought up that plant up near Detroit and shuttered it. So everybody was keeping back breeding stock in 1997. Hog supply in the US was going into 98 at the largest that it had ever been. And then 1998, one huge processing plant goes down and there's no longer capacity to slaughter them all. So the hog market just immediately crashed. So Dad was on track to lose everything if he'd kept in that commodity business. Ended up that he was speaking at a conference at the time, got really fortunate talking to some guys in the back of the room. One of them had a friend in Iowa who was selling pigs into Chicago that was retiring. So he was selling milk-fed pigs into Chicago, some high-end restaurant. Dad had no idea what they were talking about, high-end food service and everything. Dad decided to give him a call. Matthias Merges picked up the phone that day, and they talked for about 15 minutes. Apparently Matthias at that time wasn't known to pick up the phone, wasn't known to talk to anybody, but really liked what Dad was saying. Dad took him a pig, and little did Dad know, that restaurant was Charlie Trotter's. They had just been rated #1 restaurant in the world by Food and Wine magazine that year. So everything spiraled out of control from there. Dad's marketing tactic at that point was to just call up other restaurants and say, hey, I'm bringing a pig to Charlie Trotter. Would you like one as well? And of course, everybody wanted their name, their restaurant associated with the pig supplier of Charlie Trotter. Things got crazy there. As of 2002 or so, started construction on the processing plant, did some modifications, renovations to the garage. As of 2004, we got that USDA inspected, only doing poultry at that point. Added on chickens. Chickens were sometime right around 2000. USDA inspected on the farm as of 2004. Added ducks on shortly thereafter and turkeys. For quite a while, we were getting the pigs killed under USDA inspection at a different plant, bringing them back home to process them, do the further fabrication and everything.
Okay.
And then eventually got all the modifications in the plant to the point that we're able to kill them and process. So everything, in the case of the pigs, from the day that they are conceived all the way until they make it to the end consumer, they're under our control. In the case of the birds, of course, they come over from the hatchery. In the case of the ducks, or else the turkeys, we actually get started from a different farm. So we bring those in already brooded.
So I can make assumptions based on what we've talked about on other farms, but you put processing in because you couldn't find it anywhere else. Is that my
right? The processing
right?
Processing was definitely a necessary evil of our operation. If we were selling direct to consumer, I think that we probably could have made it work, where it was frozen inventory, consistent pack sizes, all of that. However, with the wholesale model, those guys really need the product to show up in time to hit their Friday and Saturday rush. So you've really got to get it to them on Wednesday or Thursday, and every single chef wants a little bit different cuts, a little bit different specs. So you've got to be processing that for the specific customer. They want it to show up in time, that it's fresh, that they can still do their prep work on it to hit it for Friday. And if you're only going to deliver once a week, it has to be fresh enough that it's going to last until your next delivery.
And that makes total sense. I mean, as a direct-to-consumer farmer myself, we had a hard time with processors where I wrote the instructions wrong. They interpreted what I wrote wrong. I had misunderstood what a cut was. They misunderstood what I was asking for. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that can be lost in the processing side.
Absolutely.
And so I hear what you're saying, the necessary evil. I mean, it's a big thing to handle. I mean, you have to be USDA inspected, then you have to have the workers for it. I mean, it's more than just throwing pigs out on pasture. Like,
absolutely,
it's very controlled. Wow, I didn't realize how deep this went. I mean, for 5 generations, you've been raising pigs on pasture.
Yep, and I like to think at times that it was easier for the generations before us. In reality, it was, of course, significantly harder. The markets were significantly easier then. Grandpa always talks about the fact that he could take a livestock trailer just behind the pickup truck, and actually at that point it was a box on the bed of the pickup truck, that he could load enough pigs into the back of the pickup, take them to market and sell them, and the check from that would be enough to buy a brand new pickup truck. So
wow.
Of course the markets are significantly different than now. They had opportunities like that to gain the revenue that they needed off of these different things, but that was all that they could get done. They didn't have poly pipe, they didn't have good fence chargers, they didn't have poly wire. So life's a whole lot easier on us to run more scale than what they could back then, even if the marketing and economics are rougher.
So you said a second ago that you've got 250 pigs now, you're working your way up to 400. Yep. You've got multiple groups. So walk me through the groups that you have, and we don't have to go see every single one of them, but what group are we in now? How do you manage the pastures, the paddocks, and moving the pigs around?
Yeah, so we got about 250 sows, so at any point we'll have, 1,500 to 2,000 pigs on the farm in total. Right now we're sitting in a group of gilts, so these girls, as of 2 weeks ago, were just in the oldest market hog pen. I sort off our breeders at the time that we start slaughtering out of the pen, so once it becomes that pen of pigs time to go to the plant, I'll go through and we'll sort out everything that doesn't have any physical defects, has the growth characteristics that I want to see in our breeding herd. And we will sort those off, give them first round parvo vaccine, they'll stay in quarantine for a month, and then second round parvo vaccine, and they go in with the rest of the gestating herd. We have, in addition to these little herds here and there, occasionally I'll keep some extra boars and stuff around. We typically have one big herd of the gestating sows. So as of right now, we have, I believe, about 250 sows on the farm. I've probably got just under 200 of those that are in that gestating herd. Those girls right now are on twice a week moves. Prior to our solar grazing enterprise, which is entirely separate conversation, the sows were rotationally grazed right behind the sheep. So the sheep would be in a paddock one day, following day sheep move forward a paddock, the sows move into that paddock. We're very, very heavily fenced. We have probably 120 permanently fenced paddocks across our 240 acres, which is far excessive for what we're doing now, but it ends up working out all right in that a lot of the paddocks are already divided with permanent fence, and then all of our poly wires are very, very short for subdivisions. I can fence 95% of the farm, can subdivide 95% of the farm with less than 400 feet of poly wire. So
That's kind of nice, I guess.
Yep, 8 step-in
Yeah.
posts and a mini reel, and I can break off the paddock into whatever size I want.
Yeah.
So.
Now, sorry if I missed it. How long are they in a paddock?
So as of right now, gestating herd is on twice a week moves. So only moving Monday or Tuesday and Thursday or Friday, depending on how things go. Prior to that, it was every 1 to 2 day moves. The market hogs are typically in their pens for significantly longer than that. So we would have a market hog pen that is designated for that weaning group that we wean every 6 weeks. I guess that we consolidate every 6 weeks. They would be in that pen for the entirety of their grow out. So we'd polywire off the front area so they have constant access to a permanent water, their feeders, and their coops. Okay. So constantly bedding the coops in the winter every week. In the summer, of course, can push that out further. Constant access to water, feed, and shelter up in the front, and then polywire with an alleyway to strip graze through the remainder of the pen. This year, all of our management is really determined by what we have available, how much rain we're getting, and what animals we have on the farm. Last year, we had 2 groups of gestating sows, had 2 groups of sheep, so it was really easy that I had 1 group of sheep rotating over there, 1 group over here, with group sows right behind them. This year, consolidated all the sows into 1 herd, still had 2 flocks of sheep, so I put one of the groups of market hogs, which is the group that these girls came out of. They were in rotation right behind the ewes over here. So I had true rotationally grazed market hogs going through this year on an actual daily 2-day move model with all of the shade shelters and feeders and everything moving. And of course the pigs are a whole lot more difficult in that regard than the sheep. Sheep get a little mineral feeder, a little water, so you could just about go out there and pull it by hand, 15 minutes and they're done. Groups of pigs, that was about 160 head herd. So I ended up with 3 feeders out there, 2 shade shelters, plus substantially bigger water. So it takes 20, 30 minutes just to hook on and move all of the infrastructure before you even get to herd pigs.
How many people do that?
Just 1.
Just 1 person?
Yep. Yeah, our operation in total right now, we're running about 15 employees.
That's it?
Yep.
Wow.
15 employees. We have about 4 full-time equivalent on the farm and the remainder of the processing plant. So we do some additional processing, some processing for others and things, but on a labor standpoint, we end up with about twice as many man hours in the processing plant as we do on the farm.
Which makes total sense. I would totally see that. But even on, this scale, usually when you've got things to move, like all that infrastructure you just talked about, when you've got things to move like that, usually it's like from what I've seen anyway, it's like a 2 to 3 man team, just trying to make it efficient. So how do you handle that?
We should go out and see the main pasture.
Let's do it.
Got 1 pasture out there. It's 40 acres that is set up very, very well for what we do.
Let's see it. Okay, so we're back out in your pasture, and what I'm seeing right now is really interesting. What am I looking at?
Yeah, so you're looking at a portion of, I guess, what used to be our chicken pasture. We never got into chicken tractors, probably should have, but we had all of the chickens on effectively a set stock model. They were Cornish crosses, which, Cornish crosses in a chicken tractor, you can really force them to get out there onto the pasture. But we had them in the coops that you can see, hopefully lined up out here, 200 to 250 per coop. So in the mornings and the evenings, they would go out and they would, scurry around through all the grasses and everything. Other than that, they pretty well sat in the coop like a Cornish cross does. Sat there and pant and ate a whole bunch and not a whole lot more. But nonetheless, we quit chickens after 2020. The markets on the wholesale side definitely weren't there. Brought in a flock of sheep in 2021, so moved all of the coops. Coops used to be spread out in 6 rows out here, pushed them all out to the fences, and now we use this as it's about half the acreage here at the main farm, and is really well set up for rotational grazing. So we run both the sheep and the pigs, typically in a leader-follower rotation out here. Okay,
so you just put a poly pipe up and run a row down between the houses, and then you just move them, and you don't move the houses stay put?
Correct, yep, the shelters stay put. The shelters, of course, if you were looking to just get into doing what we do now, the rotational grazing of sheep and pigs, the shelters out here would cost way too much for what anybody could justify. We, of course, got them bought under the chicken enterprise. We still have them, so we're still using them. But yeah, the shelters stay put. We have so it's 600 feet wide. Right in the center, we have a 4-strand fence, a little bit covered up by weeds, but have 4-strand high tensile electrified fence right there. So when it comes time to moving animals, we can move them forward a paddock. I only have 300 to 350, depending on the exact portion of the field that I'm in, 300 to 350 feet of poly wire to run to get the next paddock set up. So we're effectively just strip grazing the entire way down. I have a poly water line with these risers about every 50 to 75 feet. I don't know if I do still have it turned on. So I run the waters on a skid, so when it comes time to move animals, I have the next day's paddock already set up from the day before. Open up the poly wire, hook onto the water, pull it forward, move the feeders and any additional shade shelters, things like that I have with them. Herd the animals up to the next paddock, close the poly wire behind them, set up the next day's paddock. So when it comes to moving sheep, I can move sheep in 15-20 minutes, can move several hundred head of sheep, no big deal. Pigs takes a little bit longer, probably about an hour to get a group of pigs moved.
Wow. So talk to me a little bit then about how you're able to do farrow to finish. We've seen a lot of farms that, now granted you've been doing it for a long time, but a lot of farms come into it and they're like, well, I'll have a sow and pigs and then I'll grow out the pigs and then have the meat, market the meat. But somewhere along the line, a chain gets broken and things just get more difficult than they need to be. So they say, I'm just gonna buy feeder pigs, or the opposite, I'm just gonna have sows. How are you able to do like the whole system efficiently, effectively, successfully?
There's definitely a scale necessary to it. And for us, I don't think that there's any legitimate option for us to buy the feeder pigs in. The sows farrowing really ought to be looked at as a separate enterprise from the market hog grow out. And in an operation like ours, the farrowing is probably close to twice the labor that the grow out is. So if you're only going to choose one, especially on the small scale, it makes a whole lot more sense just to grow the pigs out and not have all the labor tied up into farrowing. But we have, as we mentioned before, about 250 sows right now. No way that we could don't think we could legitimately find the quantity of pigs that we'd need to offset the production of those girls. Yeah. And then definitely couldn't find the quality that we want.
So how many feeders are you processing a year?
We're processing probably 1,500 to 2,500, depending on exact year and where the sow herd sits.
Wow.
That'll of course go up pretty significantly once we get up to those 400 or so sows that we'd like to have.
Talk me through then, you're selling basically just to restaurants.
Yep.
And you're about to increase. Tell me how you continue to keep those relationships for the 1,500 to 2,500 animals that you're producing, and then why are you scaling up?
Yeah, so the food service is definitely very, very personnel dependent. The best operations, best arrangements we've ever had in the food service side has been when the chef is the owner. If you can get somebody that really buys into the quality of the product, that also is the one signing the checks, is definitely the best arrangement. Unfortunately, those are fairly few and far between. So it ends up being highly personnel dependent, that if you have the people at the top and the ownership administration of the restaurants that don't like the pricing, then they're gonna nix you even if the chef really, really loves you. We end up following a lot of chefs around, that chefs will bounce around between different restaurants and then they'll start buying our product over here, buying our product over there. So we've made a lot of those relationships. We have a good group of chefs out there that really like our product. And then we're also really one of the only options that are pushing into that wholesale side that are actually legit. You know, all of the big guys have their special labels, whether it be an antibiotic-free product or whatever claims they're putting on it.
You mean big guys as commercial farmers?
Yeah, big guys as in the names that we all know that we see in the grocery store, the Smithfields, the Tysons, all of those. They have their little subsidiary brands, or else even just the Tyson Naturals or whatever. That we are somewhat competing against, but you know, the chefs know that if they look at one of those type of pork chops compared to ours, there's really not any competition. So we're one of the few that are competing in that, and then of course having the processing plant ourselves gives us a lot of options to do things that the big guys can't do. So you know, if a customer wants, say, a tomahawk style pork chop, French rib chop with a really, really long bone off of it, they call up Cisco or Gordon's or any of those, they're gonna tell them that they don't care, that for 50 pounds of those chops a week, they're sure as can be not going to get a hold of the processing plant that's killing 8,000 a day and you know, do those special processing things. So we can do things that the big guys can't, we can do things that the big guys won't.
Yeah, I love that.
And then of course growing the sow herd gives us an awful lot more opportunities, because as of right now we really need all of our pig supply for the plant, for the food service side. We would really like to get into seasonally selling some feeder pigs, selling some live hogs as the market allows, some things like that.
Yeah. Gives you that flexibility, right?
Yep.
Like you're able to move your enterprise kind of around as you need to. Yep. So you talked about sows. Can we go see them now?
Yeah,
absolutely. All right, let's go see them. Okay, so we were on our way to see the sows and we started talking about waters in the truck. So this is the water system that you use for the feeder pigs.
Yep.
Walk me through why you use this, because when we had pigs, I was telling you off camera, I still don't think we know the best water to use, because they break them, they flood them, or they do something stupid to them.
Absolutely.
So what water system do you use?
Yeah, so I would agree. I don't think that I know the best water system for pigs, but this is what I've settled on as one of my mobile waters for pigs. I've got I don't know, 4 or 5 different mobile waters. And big thing is to use way bigger skid than what we think we need. So that's big enough that they can't move it around, heavy enough they can't push it.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
it's wide enough that even in all of these undulations and holes that the pigs have dug, it sits relatively flat. If you set the water crooked, then of course the float doesn't gain you anything. You either have no water in it if it floats at one end, or else the water's flowing over. Big thing that we found on pigs is that you have to eliminate all of the leaks, because every leak you get, they're gonna put a wallow right there. These are, oh shoot, I can't think of the name, Franklin's. These are Franklin waters. We picked these up on Marketplace or eBay or something for relatively cheap for what they are. I think it was $300 for the pair of them. Which of course, compared to new, I'll bet those were $1,000 waters each. But they are actual commercial hog waters.
So the flip lifts up, right?
Yep.
Like
these ones have been sitting a while, so they're definitely dirtier than what I would actually use for pigs. But nonetheless, the lid flips up. They have a float valve underneath there. This skid in particular, I have set up with the 2 waters and then also a mineral feeder in the middle.
Oh, that's what this is.
Yep.
Okay.
We do run free choice mineral on the pigs that are out on pasture that are eating an awful lot of pasture. You know, don't mess with it during the winter when they're primarily eating their ration. But when they are out on pasture, a lot of people will say that you can't give free choice mineral to pigs, that they eat too much, they get too much salt and they die. We haven't seen it to be the case. Make sure that they have water. Make sure they have good water access, not an issue at all. But we run the waters on the big skid. We run the water line for it, the supply line, up through a riser. So that's a solid black metal pipe. Comes up high enough that the pigs can't grab hold of it. Run that over to a step-in post at the fence line so that it is suspended up in the air, something like that.
Yeah.
And then just tie off of our risers there so that it's got
and this is just
access.
water supply line.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, it's 1/4 inch polyethylene.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I would agree. There's sometimes, you know, you look at what the commercial farms are doing and you're like, well, you know, that wouldn't work on pasture. But other times you can see what the commercial farms are doing and you're like, actually, they're that big for a reason. This is efficient. This works. I mean, I think this is such a great idea. $300 sounds like a lot, but when you come to the cost of, I mean, I don't know how many freaking barrels we went through, how many nipples, how many water lines, how many, you know, all of the piping that went through. I don't know how much of it we went through. It probably was more than $300, you know, like, and then the skid, I mean, it's just, you could just make this with scrap wood. You know, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, so that's awesome. Okay, now we're gonna go see this house.
Couple of tractors and a couple of old grinders to accomplish that.
We've got like a model smaller than that on my family farm.
For whatever reason, that ration, the hay-based ration, seems to get people's attention more so than anything else that we do. I think that you could grow just plain commodity white pigs in a barn, but you tell people that you're feeding them primarily ground hay, and everybody just goes wild about it for whatever reason.
So why do you use it?
So we use the ground hay because it allows us to put the gestating sows on full feed, so we don't have to limit feed them and they don't get too much body condition. So the alternative to that, and as we used to do, we were taking just a standard corn soy based ration to them, but we would have to limit feed them, so we'd have to weigh it out into buckets every single day and give the correct number of buckets to each group every single day. This way we can go twice a week, fill up the feeders, and they've got constant access to the feed. It of course has the possibly labor savings benefit. Grinding of the hay takes an awful lot of work, and of course you're feeding them significantly more pounds of feed in doing so. So the costs probably end up being relatively close on our scale as to otherwise just sending somebody out every day. But the big thing is that the stress on the pigs is just significantly different in that model. The sows aren't fighting for feed, they're not hungry, way lower stress on them.
That's a really good point, the stress on the sows because they're fighting for feed. I mean, that's not something that you really, I was really thinking about on a scale like this, right? Like, that's really interesting.
Yep, you can hear an awful lot of the commodity guys, the conventional barn-based models, talk about how like Prop 12 compliant pork in California, how it's so bad on the pigs. So getting rid of the gestation crates, they argue heavily in favor of the gestation crates, saying that it's better for the pigs, which is just absolutely asinine to somebody like myself to think that in a barn-based model, limit fed, when you're putting that many sows in there in such a high stress environment, it makes complete sense that if you just pull the walls out of the crates and have them now in group gestation, they're going to fight like crazy. They're going to beat the hell out of each other.
When I worked on a commercial pig farm, that was a lady had worked there for, 30 years. And that's what she said. She said, yeah, back in the day we had open gestation rooms, but there was a hierarchy. And there were some sows that just got beat to tar. But it was feed. It was always overfeed. And if you're saying, well, I'm not limiting their feed so they don't get too fat, it takes that away.
Yep.
Everybody's chill and calm. That's, yeah, such a good point.
Once you get them trained to the rotation, to where the pens are, to what a polywire means, you open up the polywire and they know it's time to go and they just go.
Yeah, I love putting sows on pasture. Specifically, my favorite thing was when it was hot, they made a little hut out of grass, like the tall grasses. They just chew it up and then like bury themselves under there. I thought one was gone at one point. I was like, oh my gosh, we lost our pig. Where did it go? No, she was just hiding.
You can
under
tell
her little bed.
really easily if you have them in real tall, standing, lignified grasses. You can tell when they're getting really close to having pigs because they'll be running around with mouthfuls of grass going to build a nest somewhere.
Yeah.
You had mentioned it there in reference to the water, but the commodity, conventional, barn-based has an awful lot of things that I don't agree with that are, in my opinion, morally and ethically wrong. However, there are an awful lot of the things that they do that just downright make sense for animal production. So, you kind of have to look at it through that light, and that what they're doing is very efficient. I don't know that we need to be that efficient, that we need to do the things that they do, but as long as what they're doing isn't wrong from a moral or ethical standpoint, there's probably good reason to look into it and figure out if you ought to be doing the same things. So like here we're doing, I don't know that any of the industrial guys are group farrowing, but definitely, the group gestation pens, and then their model of having their gestation and their farrowing in a different spot, segregating the pigs at their time that they should be farrowing, separating them out into various pens, and having that progression of pens that are similar aged pigs. It's similar to what we're doing out here. So the farrowing farm is divided into 60 permanently fenced pens. As the sows are identified in the gestation herd as being close to farrowing, so basically once they start throwing milk, getting bagged up, we know that they're within a week or so of farrowing. So we'll sort those out and we'll put up to 6 of them into each of these pens over here. So those sows will be farrowing in very short succession to each other. The pigs will be similar ages. Those pigs will stay together for the rest of their lives. But the biggest thing there is that we don't have sows that are farrowing 2, 3, 4 weeks apart from each other. Because when you do that, you end up with the older piglets coming to the freshly farrowed sows and stealing the colostrum. So you end up with little pigs that never get any colostrum.
Oh, yeah. So you said you put 6 sows per paddock.
Yep. The paddocks over here were all supposed to be about a half acre. They end up varying from probably 2 or 3/10 up to as much as 2 acres. So on some of the bigger pens, we'll go a little bit higher than that. The left one here is more indicative of what we would typically have than the right one. We have still far too much canopy. Over time, that should straighten itself out to the point that first thing in the spring, I've got an awful lot of grass over here. Last thing in the fall, after all of the leaves drop, we have good grass. In between, we don't have a whole lot because we have too much canopy for it to recover. We have 6 of the small coops into each of these pens. There's a Highcroft waterer. This one is up on the far side of the hill, but you can see the one over here. So permanent waterer, 6 coops that always stay in the pen. In between groups, we'll move the coops so they're on fresh ground every time. And then up to 6 sows in each pen. They have high tensile electrified wire, or what should be electrified, offset from the woven wire. As we can tell, the power's not working on this one right now.
So you said that the piglets, they are with each other all of the time. So when you're grouping, do you put these piglets in with another group of piglets when you're finishing them?
Yeah, so these guys, but these guys will have been farrowed in very short succession in this pen. As of 6 to 8 weeks after farrowing, the mothers will get pulled as we identify that the pigs are big enough, doing well enough on their own. We pull the sows every 2 weeks, any pen that is ready to have the sows pulled. We wean the sows off of the pigs rather than the pigs off of the sows. So these pigs are used to this pen, they're used to these shelters, these waterers, the creep feeder. Yeah, they're used to all of the infrastructure that's here. We don't want to stress them out by making them relearn all of that at the same time that they lose any milk supply that they had from their mother and the presence of their mother. So less stressful to pull the mothers than it is to pull the little pigs. And then every 6 weeks we consolidate any pen that no longer has the mothers in it together. So all of those little pigs will get grouped together and then go to a market hog pen.
Okay. Yeah, let's go to the next side. And okay, so we got away from the road a little bit. And now, oh, look at her. She just wants some scratches.
This one's my friend.
She's sweet. Did you name her?
Gertie.
Gertie. Aw, hi, Gertie. She's a sweet piggy. You's a good mama, huh? I see it. Hi. So we talked about it over there, but let's just like kind of recap. So the piglets have a creep feeder.
Yep.
And if people don't know what a creep feeder is, it's just a house that the pigs can go, the baby pigs can go to, but the mamas can't, so that the babies get food. The water that's permanent, their housing. Where's the sows feed?
So the sows in the woods here are still limit fed. So every day we're coming
Okay.
bringing buckets into the sows. Just a matter of basically how much infrastructure we have. Small pens, difficult to get the big equipment in, and then would take an awful lot of permanent feeders. So we haven't switched these girls to the hay ration. We'd really like to, just haven't pulled the trigger on doing so. So still feeding these daily. The additional benefit to that is that it requires us to have somebody in each pen every single day, and it's very, very obvious if somebody isn't there.
Or
the
sick,
management,
or
the management load on the actual farrowing is definitely significantly higher than the gestating or the market hog grow out. In that, if we get a bad weather that comes through, or have bad weather that's going to come through, if the fences are messed up, anything, little pigs that are in poor conditions or that are slipping under fence and can't get back to their mother is a definite issue that needs to be addressed on at least a daily basis, if not significantly more frequent than that. So by feeding them every day, we've got to be here every day anyway, isn't hurting us near as much as it would on the other herds.
Yeah. So walk me through your timeline a little bit. So the gilts, the girls that you're going to use for reproduction, but are just now big enough to get bred, they are pulled out of the feeder pen and they go in with a boar into a gestation pen, right? Or paddock, I guess I should say.
One gestating herd. So at any given point, we typically only have 2 groups of boars on the farm. We'll have our main group, and then a group that is either just a single that I bought for whatever dumb reason, or boars that are growing up to get big enough to be mature to be our main group of breeders.
Okay.
So the gilts get pulled out of the market hog pen when the market hogs are big enough for slaughter. Ideally, we should pull those earlier than that, but just the way farm life ends up working out.
Right.
So they get pulled out at that point, 1 month of quarantine to get their vaccines into them, and then they go into the main gestating herd. As of right now, we only have 1 main gestating herd on the farm, which we will go see in just a few minutes. Once a week, we go through that gestating herd and pull any of the sows that are bagged up. So any of them that have milk that we think are going to farrow within the next week get pulled out, and they go up to 6 per pen into these pens here in the woods. Yep.
Okay.
Every 3 weeks, we go through the woods here and we take any of the mothers out of the pens that have babies that are big enough to thrive on their own. So once the babies get 6 to 8 weeks old, they can make it on their own. Don't need mom anymore. We take the mothers back out and we put them back into the gestating herd.
Okay,
Then
that makes sense.
Every 6 weeks we go through, and any pen that no longer has the mothers in with it, those piglets get consolidated into one group and they go to one of the other farms into the market hog pens.
Gotcha. And by other farm, it's still your farm. It's
still our farm,
just like
just
a
different
property
properties.
adjacent. Yep. Yeah, okay.
They get a half-mile trip down the asphalt in the
Yeah.
back of a hydraulic trailer.
So talk to me about your breeds. And I know if we're going to the gestation area, your boars will be over there and we can see some of those too. But talk to me about the breed selection. It's very diverse here.
Yeah, I really hope that I get hate mail from it. Breeds are a complete and utter joke when it comes to pigs. I've seen white pigs that have farrowed absolutely great litters out on pasture, that are the first ones out there putting their nose in the grass, that do great, put them on the rail in the processing plant, have more marbling, more back fat, darker meat than some of the really high dollar show pigs that we've killed for other farmers that are Durocs or Hampshires or whatever, Mangalitsa's even. We've killed some Mangalitsa's, some of them that are just as pale as any pig that you'll ever see when it comes to the meat, and then some of them that are almost as dark red as beef. So it's really highly dependent on the specific animal that you have. And we're getting to the point that we've got the genetics that we really want. Selected for the last probably 4 generations, with our main focus being on forage efficiency of the animals. So we're not to the point of having an entirely grass-fed pig by a long shot, but I really think that here in probably another 1 to 2 generations, we'll have market hogs to the point that post consolidation into that market hog group, we'll probably put another month or 2 of feed into them and be able to pull the feed entirely. Let them grow just on our primarily legume pastures. But we have, everything is pretty well Duroc based. Dad has shown preference to Durocs, or at least did in the early years. So that was what the herd was built upon. We had different opportunities that popped up to get some different genetics that we've added in. And then also Dad sought out what he thought were the best options at the time. Added an awful lot of Hampshire into the flock, added a little bit of Tamworth here and there.
Okay.
Added just some conventional white pigs at one point just to try to get litter sizes up. So just added in what we thought we needed. As of right now, it's an entirely closed herd. and we are intentionally selecting for the animals that are going to do best on pasture. So my boars, I take post-weaning, put them straight onto that hay-based ration, which is undeniably way too low of energy, way too low of nutrition for what pigs ought to have at that stage of life. And then we're taking any of them that aren't able to thrive on that ration, putting them through the processing plant, and the remainder are the ones that become the breeders.
There's really something to that, specifically where you're saying the feed that I'm putting them on isn't enough that industry standard says that it should be, and if the ones that can't thrive on that, they don't need to be in our herd. The ones that can thrive on that, that's who I want. And we get into this like, I don't know, Purdue educated, so like we get into this mind where we're like, but these are the nutrients that you need. Like, well, those are the nutrients that you need in that scenario, and we want them to need different nutrients or a different amount of nutrients in a different scenario in this scenario. So you're saying in, well, what, 2 to 3 years? 2 to 3 years,
probably.
You want these pigs to be grass dependent. That's
I want to
awesome.
have the opportunity to do so. There's, of course, the huge push for the low PUFA diet pigs, which I don't know.
Low PUFA diet.
Low polyunsaturated fatty acids. So, you know,
Okay.
it's very, very, very much trending now for pigs and poultry that are typically corn and soy-based rations to be transitioned over to something like a barley that's lower in that polyunsaturated fatty acids. I think that there are certain things that are very, very difficult to deny, and corn being cheap is one of them, and corn being a good subject, good base for a ration in our area. I think it just makes sense that we're situated right in the Corn Belt. American farmers, for all of their faults, corn is probably one of them, that all of the system is based upon growing corn. We're right in the heart of it. I think that it's difficult to justify bringing in something from somewhere else, something that's not grown in our area, additional trucking, additional fuel to go with a different ration. But we also grow an awful lot of really good grass right here. So rather than buying in barley from afar, setting up supply chains for that, I would like to see us keep the corn and soy-based ration, as bad as it might be, for the farrowing, for the times that the animals need that higher nutrition, and then transition the feed out entirely. Rely on the legumes, the alfalfa, the things that we're able to grow here to take care of that remaining 10 months of life for the pigs, anticipating a longer grow out time than what we'd get on a grain-based ration.
That is really deep. Like, that's gonna take me a while to process all of that, because, and I mean like days or weeks, because that's something Paul and I were talking about literally just yesterday. You can't have a pig or a chicken without grain. You just can't. And we met a farmer who's from Cuba, and he said, no, in Cuba, they put pigs on the roof and feed them scraps. Because, and that's why pigs have been called a dirty animal, because they can survive on the dirt, the scraps, the leftovers. We've found a way in America, or maybe just in modern civilization, to let the pigs really thrive on a higher calorie, more nutrient dense, diet. And nobody's really figured out how to get that in between. Right. How can they not be on the corn and soybean and still thrive and be healthy and have all of those nutrient profiles met, while at the same time being in the Corn Belt? I mean, that's the biggest question, right? Like, I don't know how many fields I've passed from central Indiana to northern Indiana. Like, it was all corn and soybeans.
Yep.
That's all it was. There was nothing else here. So it's hard to, I see the business sense on being hard to justify that, but then also like the moral sense of saying, but is that good? Is that what they need?
Right. And you say that you can't raise pigs and poultry without the grain, without the corn and soy. And I would argue that you can. It's just nobody, at least in the Corn Belt, if not in the U.S., is going to, because the acreage necessary to do so would just be absurd. We're sitting on $13,000 an acre ground right here, so we couldn't afford the acreage that we would need to throw these girls out, let them survive on the acorns and the alfalfa, legumes, everything that is out there. Our acres per pig would just be huge. When we see it down south, of course primarily in the crop areas, but most of the south, there are pigs that just run free and run wild and survive just fine. You see some of those.
There's feral pigs everywhere.
They're not as fat as these girls, but they're still big, good-looking pigs. And I think that if you actually selected for the genetics, I think they call it the nature plus one principle, that if you're selecting for the pigs that can do well on their own and getting rid of the ones that can't, eventually you'll end up with the genetics that are catered to that.
Yeah, I love that segue. Let's go see the gestation pigs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
very, very fine line between good genetic development and just outright neglect. And we're animal welfare approved. We're not going to take the neglect approach. But if you could just find somebody that never took any care of their animals, that somehow still kept them from being just wild, crazy things, but had left them out in a pen for 50 years, and then you show up and you just take any of them that are the healthiest, that are the ones that thrived through that, that would be my ideal animal to raise.
Genetic line.
Genetically,
right.
yeah. Yep.
I mean, yeah, like I said, I'm gonna have to think about this for like weeks now, because it really does. We talk about it coming down to genetics, and what a lot of people hear is breed.
Yep. And breed.
It's not breed genetics. It's not like the phenotype. It's the genotype that you're looking for.
Right. You'll quite frequently hear people say that there's more variation within the breeds than there is between. And I think that they'll say that, for example, in the case of sheep, you end up with say like Barbados black bellies that are known as being a very, very hardy sheep, good hooves, good parasite resistance. But the worst Barbados black belly will have worse parasite resistance, worse hooves than just say your average commercial Suffolk or something like that is known to have poor parasite resistance, poor hooves. The best of the Suffolks will be better than the worst of the Barbados black bellies. And I think that in the case of pigs, there's no longer even those genetic predispositions within breeds, that I think that the best of, say, the Durocs is going to align pretty darn close to the best of your conventional white pigs. The worst of the Durocs is going to be pretty similar to the worst of whatever breed you choose. The only difference there, of course, is between the lard pigs and the non-lard pigs,
right.
The bacon pigs.
Yeah.
I'd still like some Meishans, though. I say that. That's probably going to be the next one that I make a dumb purchase on, is a Meishan boar.
Yeah.
The potential that they talk about in the litter size with Meishans is just huge.
It's pretty crazy. But also, then what are you taking away from the female the sow by putting such a heavy litter size on her? I mean, there's a reason why women weren't really, like human women, weren't really made to carry triplets or quadruplets, because holy cannoli, that's really hard on your body.
But even there, we see that we'll have, can have two sows in the exact same pen, came out of the same gestating herd, would have farrowed at similar times the time before. Two sows, similar sized litters, in that 8 to 10 pigs. One sow will carry great body condition the whole way through her milk production, and the other sow in the exact same pen, exact same feed, will just lose every bit of condition that she has and has to regain that prior to breeding the next time.
Yeah.
So there's an awful lot of variation that we see in the pigs. I think a lot of it is like the hierarchy that you'd mentioned before, the pecking order. There's of course some, there's an awful lot of management that has to go into minimizing the implications of that, but I think that we still have a ways to go in getting our genetics more uniform than what they are.
Yeah, for sure. It to the gestation line. So we've got the pigs here who are pregnant or with a boar, right?
Yep, that is correct.
I'm guessing that's your boar over there.
There's about 10 boars in here.
10 boars. Okay, how many boars total do you have?
Depends on time of year and how many groups we have. Typically we run 10 to 12 boars out in the herd at any given point. Definitely more than what we need, because we're weaning the sows off every 3 weeks. We shouldn't end up with any more than that portion of the sows that are pregnant at any given point, or that are cycling needing to be bred. So honestly, we could probably get away with 1-2 boars. We just always want to make sure that we have plenty extra, and if we do see any deficiencies, any genetic issues or just physical issues that come up with the boar, that we segregate them out, take them to the processing plant, get rid of them when those issues arise, rather than continuing to allow any genetic issues that we don't want to continue to see continue to thrive out here. So we started off with a group of 12 boars out here. I'm down to 10 right now over the past year, so they've been doing well. I've got 2 of them out here. That one of them's got he's limping a little bit, so we'll see if he comes back out of it, and one of them that's got a little bit of a abscess or something going on. So we'll give them a chance to see if they come back around. Otherwise, they'll go to the plant.
So talk to me then. We talked about breed, but talk to me about like phenotype. What really are you looking for in the females to put them on, to be able to put them on grass without, corn and soybean input?
Yeah, so we're selecting, we're holding back gilts really, really hard right now. So definitely doing significant more selection criteria, harsher selection criteria on the boar side than we are on the sows. So really right now on the sows, I'm just looking for good underline, good body condition, good growth characteristics. Looking for a very feminine figure on the pigs. You know, I don't want big shouldered, gruff looking, male looking sows. Like the more round, more filled out, not super framey, but definitely not the smallest pigs either. Good underline, and then good vulva shape, so that they're well catered to breeding, and then well suited to being able to carry those pigs that they do breed.
Yeah. Like I see this big spot right here,
Yep.
and she kind of fits your criteria that you were just talking about.
Yep. Yeah, she's definitely round in the back end. A lot of frame to her. She's getting a little bit on the bigger side, but she is one of the older sows that we have in this herd. She's maybe a little bit more masculine than what I would like to see. A little bit bigger tusks, broader shoulders, but still pretty consistent throughout. You know, the similar, how would you put that? That the males ought to really look like buffalo, that they should have really big wide shoulders on them and smaller back ends, whereas the sows should be the opposite of that, bigger rear ends, smaller front ends. And there's been this huge push in pigs to get really flat backs across the pigs. I think that you probably end up with bigger loins and some things like that on it, but I think that really comes at the benefit from carcass characteristics only if you're AI in pigs. I think that it really hits the pigs that are naturally breeding hard in their ability just to line up properly to get properly bred.
Yeah, and also, I mean, that straight back can be hard when they're pigging.
Yep.
And they aren't able to arch really well and get that pig over the pelvis.
Yep,
I mean, I don't know how many times I've had to pull a pig because she just could not get it over her pelvis. I mean, they'd get stuck so easily.
And we don't pull pigs. We should put that out there. The sows are expected to farrow on their own. Of course, if we see something when we're out there that needs to be pulled, we're absolutely going to pull it. But the incidences that we have ever saw that, I think that Dad's probably pulled 2 pigs in my lifetime.
Wow.
And we don't lose sows with farrowing issues. We don't pull pigs. As long as you keep the body condition proper and you're selecting for the proper pigs, it's really a non-issue. Everybody gets super freaked out when they get their first sow breeding their first pigs to farrow, that they're gonna have to be out there all night. I know of decent sized operations that have people that sit out there all night when they've got sows that are farrowing.
Yeah.
And to us, that just doesn't make sense. If you got the right genetics and you don't get them too fat prior to farrowing, they end up not having those issues.
Well, and that's been a time coming, I'm sure. Your grandpa didn't just walk in and have the best breeding characteristics and farrowing characteristics, right? Like, it's really worked through multiple lines of family, multiple lines of pigs, you working on the genetics that you have and that you want to have. So it's not like like you said, if you see a problem, you fix it.
I think the genetics were probably actually easier to get right in Grandpa's time, because the people that were raising pigs were raising them more similar to what we are now, and AI wasn't so prevalent at that time. I think that there's a very legitimate issue in pigs today that the majority of them just can't or won't breed, just because they've been, for the past 20 generations, it's been all artificial insemination, and they just don't know how anymore. There's been no selection criteria whatsoever on actual fertility and breeding ability.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so as we're kind of finishing up and wrapping up here with visiting your property, I try to ask a future question, advice or whatever, but you really have walked into the family lineage of this is how we do it, and you've just improved on that, and that's kind of what's been put into you from your family, is we just improve on what we have. How do we get into this middle ground? I mean, personally, we'll end up homesteading. We're not gonna, ever be at your size. But there are things that I can take from being here with you, right? How do we bridge that gap on, yes, you can have a farm of this size, or you can, just have 1 or 2 sows and feed your family and sell the extra piglets, or however it works. How do we bridge that gap between the two? Because sometimes I think that the communication lines aren't always open.
Absolutely.
How do we fix that?
I mean, I was very privileged in the fact that I walked into this without huge paradigms to break down within the family, within the management structure, but also I didn't have the opportunity to see a different way and be thinking outside the box on absolutely everything. I was set into certain paradigms that are on the right track, I would argue, but they're still paradigms nonetheless. And I think that, from our perspective, we're doing this. We've done this for decades. In the case of Dad, 10, 15 years that I've put my full-time efforts into this thing, and several generations of knowledge before us. But that comes at a disadvantage when there are new ideas, new technology coming out every single day that we've never seen, that grandpa and great grandpa before him definitely never seen.
Yeah.
So we're convinced that we have to operate without these things. There are new ideas that come from every which way. We take an awful lot of inspiration from the commodity industrial guys. They're doing everything wrong in our opinion, but there are certain things that they're doing right. So I mean, you can't get caught up in your paradigms, no matter how much you think those paradigms are correct. There's always new inspiration that comes from everywhere.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And just in my personal journey of visiting farms just like yours, I'm seeing that. Like, okay, I already had, a big open box that I was trying to think outside of, and there's always something else to look at, something else to learn from someone else, no matter what their size are.
Absolutely.
Or, their management practice. So thank you so much, Evan, for having me out and showing me around. This has been so cool. You don't, especially in Indiana, like especially in the Midwest, where there are hog houses everywhere. And I mean, like, commercial hog houses. You don't see this, you don't hear of this. You know that there's 10,000 hogs in one barn. That you can wrap your head around. Putting them on pasture, that's something
People
different.
don't expect it. I've got an hour and a half commute 2 to 3 times a week now, right across the northern portion of the state, the whole way across. So I get to drive through one of the absolute bread baskets of the world. In my entire childhood growing up, I think I've saw 2 or 3 instances of pigs being raised outside that weren't ours. It's sad that I have to say that on that commute, a couple times a week, I get to see 2 instances of pigs outside that aren't ours, and that whole drive across, driving past countless farms and countless acres of corn and soybeans. And there's just very, very few people that break outside of that conventional model.
I see it happening.
It's coming around.
I see it happening. I see it happening. Black, white, or different. So thank you again. This was awesome. I appreciate it.
Happy to have you here.
Thanks. I always learn something from every farm, and I walk away from every single farm with something that I need to think about more. And there's so much here for me to think about. Paul and I will never be at this scale. And I shouldn't say never, but it's pretty darn likely that we would never be at this scale. And yet there's still something to learn and think about and use for what we're gonna have as a small homestead in North Carolina. 2 completely different climates, 2 completely different models. Things can still, be used. And so if there's one thing that I've taken away from this, it's that there's still something to learn, and things can be used across a multitude of models. So thank you for coming along with me. We still have so many farms in Indiana to see, and I know I will see you at the next one.